Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode here on African Confessions. The following story that you're going to be listening to, it comes from a translation of a message that was sent to me by one of our admin. Strange things indeed they do happen in this world. The message reads like this. Hello, how are you? Can you please post my own story as anonymous? So I did bewitch my own neighbor's son because I was jealous of the way that his life was going and I wanted to destroy his future. Now he is someone who is just a drunkard. Please can you change the location where I am staying? But I am here in Gauteng. My name is Lerato, not a real name, and I live in Protea Glen, Soweto. I know that what I did was very wrong. But the problem was that my son, he was not achieving anything. My son dropped out of school when I desperately wanted him to remain in school since he was very intelligent and he was supposed to be the one to change the fortunes of our generation. He dropped out of school and his friend, my neighbor's son, continued with his education. When I got wiser was when this other boy from our neighborhood became a doctor. Within a very short period of time, when he was still on his attachments, he then got his first car. From there on, he continued growing and he then purchased a house. He moved out of the location. And when I looked at my neighbor's son, him being said that he was also going to become a medical doctor, I said, no, that should not happen. Because my son, he had left school, so I did not want to see my neighbor getting rich through their son. I know that my confession might make some people angry, but let me just confess, almost a decade ago, I performed a ritual that changed this boy's life forever. I bewitched my neighbor's son, Kabelo, not his real name, because of jealousy and anger. By the time that I really did it, he was in medical school. He was a promising medical student, and indeed, it seemed as if he had a bright future. But now he's nothing more than a drunkard, wandering aimlessly around the streets. In 2014, and at that time, my son, he used to be the one who seemed to have a bright future. But all of a sudden, things did not go according to plan. As for Kabelo, he continued. He was serious about what he was doing, not dating anyone, going to church. He was like the pride of our whole street. He was a role model. He was young, smart, and well on his way to becoming a doctor. Everyone admired him, and he was said to be a very good gospel singer. Everyone just wanted him to at least become a very big role model, and everyone was wishing him well. Even I, but I was just pretending. Deep down, when I would see him, I would feel like I hated him. I wanted my son to be like him. My son already was into drugs and we could not do anything about it. I could not stand it. I had my own reasons, personal and petty as they may seem. You know, when you are neighbors, there are those small arguments. Some they forgive and forget, but as for me, I did not do that. And she would always brag about her son, making me feel like I was nothing. Worst of all, when my own son went into her yard and stole her 2-plate stove, it was as if my son had stolen something that was much valuable. I told her that I was going to ShopRite to buy the stove, for it was around 100 rand at that time, but she complained about my son. I felt bitter. I bought the stove and I gave it to her, but she kept on complaining about my son. That was when I made up my mind to use the knowledge that I had, things that I knew my grandmother would help me to put an end to her own son's future, since she had said that my son was nothing but a drug addict. I knew I had to do it. I started planning the ritual. It was in late June 2014. I remembered that my grandmother, she was someone who was helping a lot of people, women in particular, those that wanted things that did not belong to them. So I was willing to go back so that I can try up with my own grandmother. When I arrived there, it was quite easy. I told my grandmother everything that I wanted to be done. My grandmother then told me that there were things that we needed: a beer bottle, a piece of rope, and a small doll that I had to make myself. The doll was meant to represent Kabelo. I tied it to the beer bottle with a rope, symbolizing how I wanted to bind his spirit to that bottle. I wanted him to be lost forever. Like, since we were going to leave that beer bottle and the doll tied to a tree in a forest, he was forever going to be lost in that forest, to forget about his ambitions and to be consumed by alcohol. I knew that if he ever became a drunkard. In July of 2014, I was there with my grandmother, the place where I grew up at Engozini. That was where I was. So me and my grandmother, one early morning in July, we then went to this other forest. When we were at that forest, that was when we reached this other spot where there were a lot of trees. My grandmother, she had some traditional beer which she had brewed, and when the beer was ready, that was when we went into the forest. She started with the ritual. She knelt down, then she called upon the spirits to bind Kabelo to the beer bottle that I had bought, a black label beer bottle that was still full and opened. And then she poured some beer, the traditional beer, on the ground, offering them so that they can go and bind themselves to the spirit of Kabelo. And after that, that was when my grandmother made me to dig a hole that was big enough to cover the entire bottle. So I did. I had tied it with a rope and I covered the beer bottle as well as that doll that I had made all by myself. And then we had tied that beer bottle to the tree. So we left it there. As long as it is there in that forest, he will never be able to let go of Black Label. Forever, he is going to be like that. I returned back to Jozi. It did not take long for things to start changing. By the end of that year, Kabelo had dropped out of medical school. People started noticing that he was drinking even more and more, hanging around taverns and spending less time studying. His mom was totally devastated. They called the pastor, but still he did not change. Over the next few years, his drinking got so worse. He lost interest in everything that once mattered to him, and then he became a shadow of the young man that he used to be. He became like my son, and that is all that I wanted. So it has been nearly a decade since I performed that ritual. And even right now, Kabelo is still a drunkard, wasting his life away. His mom rarely speaks to anyone. She has depression, always keeping to herself. But to tell you the truth, there are nights when I think about him, when I cannot sleep, knowing that what I did to him was wrong. But at the end of the day, I tell myself that if this boy was going to become a doctor, he was going to think that he was far much better than my own son. It is better that they become the same. I know that as long as that bottle is there in that forest, it will never be okay. Even if it happens that I am forced to return back to that forest to take that beer bottle, I don't even know where it is right now, because it has been a very long time. Dear listeners, right there was a message that was sent to me by one of our admin who gave us this translation.